If we examine the real world benefit, this is, I'm visualizing actually what we did to look at the data that we have available to us. So you've already heard from Rob that we've got auto supports coming from every, or for a large portion of what we have out in the field. These auto supports give us data around most importantly around the individual workloads that live on every one of our appliances, but also the behavior that they create or that they have, and then the response of the appliance to those behaviors. What I'm visualizing here is kind of like a virtual or a straw man timeline for most of our customers, people that you talk to, people that we talk to on a daily basis. You can imagine that every one of these vertical lines is an event. They are events that are associated with certain things. Things like installation can be an event that we see and we recognize. Things like planning, strategic planning. This is the ability for us to take that data, analyze it in a contextually smart way, and then make critical decisions about it. There are things that exist on traditional storage technologies like provisioning. We've heard things like making LUNs or volumes, aggregate storage pools, media pools, whatever that might be, vvols. These are all events that happen on traditional storage arrays. And then things like performance, understanding what the implication is of the behavior that you see on the storage array and whether or not it indicates a storage performance issue. Many times these types of events, performance-related events, the way that the customer understands that something is happening is that the end user customer, the customer of our customer, opens a case, opens a ticket, it gets escalated, it has a whole lot of overhead kind of associated with that. And then there's a troubleshooting performance kind of workflow, depending on who you're using for a storage vendor, that everyone has to go through. Our first series of innovations that we brought to market almost a decade ago is to make all of those things go away. And in fact, what we see is that these types of behaviors, they happen more frequently than our customers report. And in fact, we did a data sample analysis to look at a period, a subset, a sample of all the managed objects that we see and that our appliances kind of respond to. And we were interested in finding out, like, what are the behaviors that we could reasonably kind of project are things that would be problematic. And what we settled on were managed objects that exhibit behavior where they consume a certain amount of performance reserves on the storage array. And that over the course of 7 days, that behavior caused an increase in performance reserve by over 150% or more. And the results that we got were anything from 150%, that's the line that we decided to draw, to 15,000% in performance reserves change. And over the entire data sample, that equated to about 11% of managed objects. This is 11% on average for every customer of VMs that have behaviors that could create a case. And what we find as we check with our customers anecdotally is that, one, those VMs, that behavior does not create a case when it's Tintri storage, because obviously we do all the autonomous optimization for performance. The other thing that we discovered is that many of those 11%, if you're not using Tintri VM Store, some of those don't create a case either, because either it's repetitive experience, somebody's using a virtual machine, it goes slow every Monday, and they just don't ever open a case. They open a case the first time, somebody tries to fix it, it's not a problem on Tuesday. The infrastructure team says, is it a problem today? No, it's not. I'll close that case. They didn't do anything, they didn't change anything, but they're relying on the fact that the customer is going to go away and maybe just deal with it. As a kind of a feather in their hat for, we're providing, some really great stuff. But what we're saying here at Tintri is that our systems are autonomously looking at these behaviors and are autonomously responding to them. Real quick slide. Again, this is really to talk about how we take those individual events, we make them go away from a performance standpoint. Obviously, we've talked to you a lot about how we handle those performance events. But things like provisioning, you don't, generally our customers don't carve up each VM store into little, sub sections. They can if they want, but for most of our customers, they just use it as one big pool of storage, and they allow our AutoQoS to handle performance. But it also means that installation is super simple. It's you don't have to architect it. There's no Excel spreadsheet, no cut sheet, no professional services. You literally install it. You walk through a wizard. Part of the wizard's asking you what the VM, what the ecosystem manager's login credentials are, and that could be, again, you've heard hypervisor managers like Hyper-V, SCVMM, vCenter server. You enter those things, and again, that's it. You're kind of done. And then from a planning standpoint, we even make that a lot easier too. And we'll talk about that later on as we delve into how we take the telemetry that we generate on-prem and we send it up to the cloud for analysis. So just real quick, so we know what we're talking about. I've heard this a bunch of times, but our current footprint of managed objects is around 1.4 million live managed objects. We support a lot of environments that have high churn. So this is not the total number of managed objects we've ever seen, which is actually multiplicative of this. But the ones that are living today, that our customers are using today, is around 1.4 million managed objects. This represents about 78 billion data points every 10 seconds. So somebody asked whether or not you need to be in the cloud for this, and I think we see a lot in the market and in the industry that cloud analytics, and we're crunching some number of trillion data points or whatever. These are being analyzed on-prem within the appliance, and then also in TGC installed on-prem, in order to provide all those benefits that we've already shown you so far. So this 78 billion, we do have access to it for the cloud, but because those are all included in the auto supports, but all the things that you've seen so far, performance reserve optimization, VM scale out recommendations, that happens whether you have cloud or not. And then if every one of those 11% of VMs created a case, and we were to look at industry data for mean time to resolution, our autonomous optimization, the fact that it works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, represents about 64 million hours a year cumulative in administrative value. So, again, we're not waiting for someone to open a case so that we can point our administrators to a cloud portal where they can get some clue as to, what to tune on the storage array to alleviate that problem for the end user customer. This is all happening autonomously without anybody watching it. So, with that, I want to pivot real quick. You've already heard a lot about what our data model allows us to do from an intelligence and autonomous optimization standpoint. And so you already heard what we're doing about SQL databases. It makes sense, right? The fact that we use these components within the VM store arrays to handle the relationship between files on a file system and whether or not they mean something contextually. It makes sense that files being kind of the center of the VM store universe, relating them to VMs and now relating to databases, that data model makes a lot of sense, right? Understanding what the workload patterns are and whether or not we should do something about them. That's what we want to show you next.